Were you on mute there?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Welcome, everyone. We're just going to give another 30 seconds just to let others come in to the webinar. Welcome, everyone that's joining us. We'll just get started now in a couple of seconds. See if there's more people coming in. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our data compliance webinar today. Our webinar today is on navigating data compliance, DSARs, FOI requests, and redaction in an AI era. I am Laura Stotesbury. I am the head of marketing at ComplyKEY, and I'm going to be your moderator for today's session. We have an exceptional lineup of guest speakers today who will hopefully unravel the complexities of data subject access requests, freedom of information requests, and redaction in a world of data compliance. So just before we get started, a few admin pieces. You will all be in listen-only mode. The webinar is being recorded and it's going to be sent out after. If anybody has questions, we're going to try and do a Q&A session at the end where time permits. So please ask your questions in the chat function. So I'd just like to take the time now to introduce our speakers today. Joining us today are industry leaders, Lorcan Kennedy, CTO of ComplyKEY. And just a quick snapshot on ComplyKEY. ComplyKEY is digitalizing compliance and data management with a comprehensive range of data compliance modules. Joining Lorcan today is Darren. Welcome, Darren.
Hi.
And Darren is the CRO from Smartbox.ai. Smartbox are bringing multilingual AI-based forensic data detection and redaction solutions. And last but not least, welcome to Cristina. Cristina is the founder and DPO at Jazzy DPO. And Jazzy DPO are developing bespoke compliance programs for organizations. So I suppose without further ado, we're going to dive into the webinar today, and we're going to start with Cristina, who is going to kind of give a background and tell us a little bit about the surge in DSARs and provide a little background into that legal landscape. Over to yourself, Cristina.
Thank you, Laura, and hi, everyone. I'm Cristina. I am the founder of Jazzy DPO. We are a remote consultancy advising businesses in Europe on their data protection obligations. Now, I have a legal background, so today I'll start by introducing the legal background behind DSARs and what organizations need to be aware of when responding to such requests. But I'll also look into a bit why we're seeing so many of these coming in and why it's important for organizations to have processes in place to deal with them in a compliant manner. Now, in terms of data subject access requests, we're already almost 6 years into the GDPR, so you would have encountered this term already. And if you haven't, well, kudos to you. These are requests from individuals for a copy of the personal data that an organization has about them. Now, the right of access is a legal right under the GDPR, so this means that such requests can't be ignored as they are enforceable. There are limited circumstances in which you can provide less data or you can refuse to comply with the request altogether, but you will always need to justify your reasoning, and the individual still has the right to take this forward with the regulator. Now, it's important to note that these requests can come in by any means. They don't need to be in writing. They can even be over the phone or face-to-face. So it's important to be able to recognize them as they come in, as you do have a deadline to respond. And that deadline is 1 month, and it starts on the day that the request is received. This can be extended for up to 3 months if this request is complex, but keep in mind that what makes a request complex is not always the volume of the data, but any additional assessments that might be required when you are drafting the response. So it shouldn't be your default approach to ask for an extension for all requests because you have a lot of volumes of data. Now, in terms of what's in scope in when you receive such a request, it's important to know that all the personal data that you hold about an individual is in scope, but it's important to know that it's just the personal data that should be disclosed. There are exemptions to this, so you should not be disclosing any business confidential information, any information covered by legal professional privilege, and also any data of third parties. This is not generally disclosable, but can be provided if you have the consent of the third party, or if it's reasonable to disclose that data without consent. Now, what is reasonable is not always given out by regulators, but to give you a mere example of a disclosure that doesn't require the consent of the third party is, for example, if you receive a request from a former employee for a copy of their performance records, obviously notes from their manager would be in those performance records. If the manager is no longer with you and you can't ask for their consent, it would be reasonable to disclose that data to the individual without their consent, because the data subject would have already seen those notes when they were an employee. But for any other situations where third-party data is involved, there is an assessment that needs to be conducted and will be considered on a case-by-case basis. Now, together with the data, the individuals also have the right to receive supplementary information, such as purposes of processing, the legal basis for processing, and also the source of the data if that wasn't collected from the individual themselves. This is particularly important when you're looking at data from marketing or sales departments. So it's important to disclose this with the response in the request. However, if you already have this information in your privacy notice, you can provide a link to the privacy notice, but just make sure that the privacy notice is updated. You do not want to disclose the response to a DSAR with it having information that is not in your privacy notice. And this was kind of the legal landscape behind data subject access requests. And now I'm going to talk a bit about why we're seeing so many of these coming in, and especially in the last few years. And it is true that there has been a big increase in the data subject access requests since the GDPR, even though the right of access was also right under the previous regime in various jurisdictions, but it wasn't enforced or exercised that often. The reason behind this, in my opinion, I think it's that even though the GDPR is not a perfect piece of legislation, it did do one thing very well. It kind of raised the profile of data protection. It made people more aware of their rights, and naturally, people started exercising them. It is true that nowadays individuals are becoming more and more privacy conscientious, and they want to keep organizations accountable for how they process their personal data. And DSARs can be used as a tool of doing exactly that, as a tool of saying how much data organizations have about them, and as a way of keeping them accountable for the way in which they process the data. But there are other factors that can also cause an increase in DSARs at an organizational level. And these are, for example, data breaches. It is true that when individuals hear about a data breach, they are more likely to submit a data subject access request to see exactly what information you have about them. And this is also the case for if the breach was not your organization's, but if a competitor of yours has suffered a data breach, people might find about it in the news and think, oh, I'm using a similar provider for this. Let's just see what kind of data they have about me. And in these situations, sometimes the DSAR is followed by a data deletion request, which is kind of a blessing in disguise if you think about it, because if you have the response to DSAR, it's a lot easier to carry out the deletion. But also a big factor, and which is also a bit more controversial, but it is a reality nevertheless, is a complaint or a dispute with the data subject. It's true that in situations like this, the individuals are more likely to submit a DSAR to gather more information that may or may not help them in the dispute. Now, I'm approaching the end of my section, but I do want to leave you with one thing from this, if you're still with me by now. It is true that DSARs are a reality nowadays, so there's no escaping the obligation to have processes in place to deal with them, nor there should be a reason why you would want to do so. But the reason why you should take this seriously goes beyond just the fact that it's the law. They are sometimes the first stage before a complaint to the regulator, and there are many reasons why you wouldn't want this to happen. This complaint may lead to an investigation, which might look into other areas beyond how you dealt with the DSAR response. They may look into your records of processing activities, your legal basis for processing, and just open the organization to a monetary fine. So it's quite important to take them seriously. It's important to have robust internal processes to respond to them in a compliant manner. But the beauty of having such robust processes is that they don't need to be used for DSARs only. You can update them for any type of disclosures or deletion requests. So it's not an investment into just data subject access requests. It's more into your general accountability obligations, and it can help you meet other types of legal obligations. And I think that's kind of it from me today. I'll pass it along to Laura, and I'm still here.
Thanks, Cristina. I think that has set the scene quite well in terms of the, can you hear me?
Yes.
In terms of the, I suppose, the background, and you've taken it from a data subject access request, which I think a lot of it is relevant when it comes to freedom of information requests as well. So Darren, I think this is nice to hand over to you, you're going to summarize the top kind of challenges, or top 10 challenges in preparing for data subject access requests and freedom of information requests. So over to yourself, Darren.
Great stuff. Thanks, Laura, and thanks, Cristina, for setting the scene. So here at Smartbox, we use AI to detect and redact personal and sensitive data, working very closely with ComplyKEY and really trying to solve, or helping to solve, the DSAR and FOI problem that is growing. I mean, our customers are telling us on a daily basis that compared to last year, they're seeing an increase of at least 50% on the number of SARs that are coming in each week. So it's a rising problem, and the challenges that we are being told that our customers are facing vary. The top 10 as I've listed here, one is around how to actually collect that raw data. So whether it's around FOIs or DSARs, data resides in many different data systems. Some of the banks that we deal with, it's normal for them to have to interrogate 40 different systems before they can get the information that their customers require. And the same is true with medical records. A lot of the trusts that we work with are having to interrogate lots of different systems, and those systems have some handwritten information as well. So that first stage of collecting the data is hard, and it can be challenging, and that's something that we often are advising customers on. Once that data has been collected, we tend to find lots of duplicated information within that data set, whether that's the same information appearing more than once or more frequently. If it's around DSARs relating to employees, email threads are always coming up as a problematic area. So if I send an email to Lorcan on this call and Lorcan sends it to Cristina and Cristina sends that on, then my email has been repeated a number of times. So the challenge really is how do you get rid of the duplicated information and just reduce that review size that you need to actually do. I mentioned around medical records. So with some of the trusts that we work with, a lot of medical records are still handwritten. So that is problematic. Some of the work we're doing in the prison service as well, a lot of those notes are handwritten. And just because something's handwritten, it doesn't mean that they can be excluded from the review process. So that can be quite a challenge as well. Foreign languages is not that common, but for international companies, or if you have organizations that employ people with foreign languages, then it can come up as a challenge, how they process those particular data sets. I think the biggest challenge, though, is how people actually find personal and sensitive data that relates to third parties. So doing a search on a particular subject can be relatively straightforward, but by doing that search, you're going to automatically collect information about third parties. And that's really where the risk is. How do you quickly identify the names and personal identifiers of those third parties, and then review and probably redact that third party data? That's probably the biggest area where we see the most challenge and the most time consuming. Collaboration of colleagues or with colleagues is something that we also help customers with. So at the moment, organizations are using things like Teams and SharePoint to collaborate on a case together. But sometimes that means coming out of one system and logging into another one, and you're just creating inefficiencies when we're trying to collaborate with colleagues on a particular disclosure. Again, probably the second biggest area is actually redaction and how people can redact information at speed across an entire data set. We still see lots of companies that are printing off information and then using a black pen to redact out the sensitive data and then photocopy the information and send it on to the subject. That clearly is very time consuming and can be very problematic. We've also seen organizations that have given us their data that has been redacted, and our technology can read under the redactions just because the technology that they've been using isn't actually very good from a redaction perspective. So redaction is a big issue that you need to get right. When it comes to actually sharing that disclosure, that can sometimes be problematic. We're seeing more and more organizations that do require for the final disclosure to be printed off. So that itself can take a bit of time. If the subject is happy to receive the information electronically, then it's just important that information is shared securely using encrypted links. Otherwise, again, you are creating problems down the line. When it comes to future challenges, that's another area that we get asked about quite a bit. So if the information is disclosed to a subject around an FOI or a DSAR, then sometimes the challenge is, why have certain things been redacted and why have certain information been excluded? So it's just make sure that there's a defensible line there so that if there is a challenge, you can very quickly articulate why you redacted certain information. And the last one, of course, perhaps the most important, is how you keep on top of deadlines. We've seen organizations that are way behind the curve when it comes to submitting their responses. And the challenge, of course, there is if you don't keep up, you're just making a bigger problem for yourself. And if you consider what I said at the start, that there's an increase in DSARs and FOIs, it's important that we manage these DSARs in a timely way. So those are the top 10 challenges that we're seeing. I'm going to pass over to my colleague Lorcan now, who can explain how ComplyKEY are helping to address some of those challenges. And then after that, I'll come back and talk about how AI can really play a part in also removing a lot of these challenges for you.
Great. Thank you very much, Darren. So what I'd like to talk today really is just some of what we consider to be the key components of a good, fit-for-purpose, efficient DSAR/FOI process. And in talking about it and thinking about it today as well, we also consider all the other reasons that you may need to disclose information to third parties or to people. So it's not just what they're entitled to under law. It might be as part of litigation. It might be as part of dispute resolution. So there are many reasons that we're called upon to disclose information. And it's important to treat them all consistently. So the policies that we talk about today really should be developed and extended to include all of these use cases. So the first thing is that we need clear policies and procedures. It can't be seat of the pants stuff. Ooh, we got this, what did we do? Let's all panic. So we need to think about it beforehand. We need to get well-documented policies. We need to define the roles within that. So for a DSAR or an FOI request, it's important to have an owner of that. Somebody who's going to track it through the organization, who's going to maybe interface with other people, delegate tasks to them, collect those work product back, and push it through the rest of the process. Training and awareness, this is something that we can't overstate. And what we see in a lot of organizations is it falls onto one person who's responsible for this. And really what that is, this person is responsible for the execution. But it's important that everybody in the organization has some training and awareness. So we don't, for instance, want DSARs to happen in an ad hoc manner. We don't want somebody phoning up reception and saying, hey, I need to get this information. Maybe they'll give it, maybe they won't. Maybe they'll pass it on to somebody else, maybe they won't. So we've got to make sure everybody is aware how to recognize these and what the correct process and procedure is. Obviously, keeping abreast of relevant laws. They vary by industry, they vary by jurisdiction. So it's important to know and keep on top of what's relevant to your business. So we would recommend, that there's some level of automation and technology brought to bear on this. We heard from Cristina, we have deadlines on all of these, and there are penalties attached to breach of deadline. So we do need tools to track these. We need tools to help us process these. We need tools to help us with the efficient retrieval of the information. When we talk about document storage, I think there's a few things that we need to consider here as well. So if I'm a hospital, for instance, and somebody phones up looking for their x-rays, that's a very clear data subject access request. I know the person, I know what they're looking for, I know how to get it. But in lots of other industries, we're talking a lot about unstructured data. If this is an employee dispute, it could be the notes that the supervisor took as they were going through. And this goes back again to our training and awareness. As we heard from Darren, just because it's written down, with pencil and paper, it doesn't mean that it's not discoverable and disclosable, because it is. So we're trying all of these things to get our data as structured as possible. Make sure we have a valid ROPA record for everything that we process through, because this informs how we process it, how long we keep it, what we do with it, what's its life cycle. And so we need to make sure that all the things that might come up, we're aware of. Clear communication channels for request submission, very important. As we heard from Cristina, it could come through letter, it could come through phone, it could come through anything. But we also have the opportunity to direct people. So we might say, for instance, well, go to our webpage, here's the URL, and submit your request through there. And 99% of the time, people will do it. That gives us a timestamp. It gives us a clear entry point into a process. It gives us some very precise information, and it gives us a clear basis to work on. So can everybody hear me?
Yep. Loud and
Okay.
clear.
So the more user-friendly we can make that process, the better. And try and encourage people to go down that path and that chain. So the standardized response templates, any good system will have some standardized templates. We need to acknowledge the receipt of the request. We need to understand when the clock starts. If we need to delay, we need to communicate that clearly and precisely. As we heard from Cristina, there are valid reasons that we can put in a delay, although it should not be our default position. But then, depending on the nature of the request, we should be able to customize these templates as well. And in a lot of this, consistency is key. Again, with the legal compliance, we need to stay informed on the laws and our regulations. We need regular review and updates. We need to make sure that our process is fit for purpose. We talked a little bit about timelines, about the importance of proactive communication back to the requester and proactive communication within the organization itself. In a lot of cases, it's unlikely that one person can satisfy the entire request. We probably need to go to multiple different departments. We might need to go to payroll. We might need to go to HR. We might need to go to production. We're going to need to go to different places. We need to communicate clearly what we expect from that department, what their obligations are, what the timeline is back, and make sure they understand what to do and who to get it back to. Then we would always recommend, like any good policy, it should be subject to periodic review and assessment. Feedback drives improvement. And that brings us on, I guess, to our next slide. So when we look at these and we look at some of our customers, we pick up the papers and we see, well, what are key things that we want to take out of here? Our process and procedure must be defensible. So if we're not going to disclose everything, we need a reason why. That should be documented. That document should be available to scrutiny, and we should understand ourselves why we're not doing it, and we should be able to defend those decisions. So our responses must be legally sound. They must withstand scrutiny, provide a strong foundation for compliance with data protection and freedom of information laws. As we heard from Cristina, a lot of this is not optional. But on the defensibility as well, consider where we might be asked to defend these. So probably somebody, asked for their x-rays. We probably don't need to defend. You got 3 x-rays, we sent you 3 x-rays, life is good. But if it's the press that are ringing you up under freedom of information, so it's really important that we disclose everything we're supposed to be disclosed. We don't disclose anything that's not supposed to be disclosed, or that wasn't asked for, that wasn't within the scope of the request, or that we've clarified that scope of the request. And we need to make sure that everything that we do is defensible, because there's a better than reasonable chance that at some point we're going to be asked to defend it. That may be in a court of law. We need to enable consistent and replicable processes for handling all of these. So if, for instance, we get 2 subject access requests, we disclose a load to one guy and we disclose very little to the other guy, where are we on that? What's the reason for that? It must be repeatable. Freedom of information is exactly the same as somebody's contacting us about their planning application. We need to know that we've gone through the same process each time so that we can stand and we're happy with it. We need to reduce the risk of errors, inconsistencies, and compliance gaps. All of these really come back to accountability. I'm struck by the case in RTE, if any of you are familiar with it, as I'm sure anybody who's Irish-based is. This whole national organisation hanging on a thread, it all started with one error in a disclosure. So we need accountability all the way through this. That starts at the time of collection, at the time of first contact. We need to make sure we understand, is this person allowed to ask us for that? Are they asking us for somebody else? Well, that's probably not allowed. Are we subject to FOI legislation? Make sure that we have all of that stuff processed, proceduralized, and then make sure we have a process that we're accountable for every stage of that process, the response, and we need to promote a culture of responsibility. We need to facilitate robust record keeping and documentation, ensure a clear trail all the way through. And again, can't overstate, I guess, when we're talking about unstructured data, we have a lot of challenge here. Do we know what's sitting on our file servers? Do we know what's sitting in our filing cabinets? Do we know what's in the supervisor's notebook? Do we know what the manager wrote in the back of an envelope? We don't. Some of that is unknowable, but we should have policies for our managers, for our supervisors, what they should record in notebooks, what they shouldn't record in notebooks, or record it short term, delete it, tear it up, shred it. So what I would leave you with is the policies that we put in, we must be able to stand over them. We must have the policy, we must adhere to it, we will be called to defend it. So I will pass you back and I'll be happy to take questions on this at the end. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lorcan. So I'm just going to just take a 5 minutes or so just to talk about AI and how AI can help with some of this work. It's hard, it's difficult processing FOIs and DSARs. We know this because our customers tell us every single day. So let's just kind of remind ourselves of the sort of stage one of this is to actually build your data set. So if it's around employees, then the first place to go is typically their emails. But the emails as well, the risk is as well. It's within their handwritten emails that you find references to other people. But that's key to actually get hold of those emails. And the team at ComplyKey are very versed in helping organizations do that. But it's not just emails, it's HR records, it's enterprise social networks, whether that be conversations that are taking place in Slack or on Teams. And what I found on the team side is that depending on who you talk to, different companies, some say you should be disclosing Teams chats and some say you shouldn't. I think a lot of that comes down to policy. And that's certainly something that Cristina can advise you on if that's an area of uncertainty within your business. Handwritten notes, as Lorcan said, just because they're handwritten doesn't mean to say that they shouldn't be disclosed. And that also, of course, relates back to notes that might be in Iron Mountain or in offsite archive somewhere. One of our clients has said that some of their employees have been there 30 years. Their physical contract is stored off-site together with lots of other handwritten notes. So those notes would have to be taken out of storage, scanned, and then considered as part of the discovery and the review process. And of course, after that, there are many specific systems that are based on particular industries as well. So leasing companies have certain systems, as do other industries. So all those things have to be considered as part of that building your data set phase. Once that's done, you then need to obviously review all that data and then disclose it. But AI can really help with a lot of this information and a lot of this process work. So what we do at Smartbox, if you load any information into Smartbox, that information is automatically converted to PDF. So that one phase alone can save companies days of time. I mean, some of our council customers say that when they ask for information from the different departments, it can take 2 or 3 days just converting words to various PDFs. So our technology does it automatically. The technology also then finds all the references to names and third parties without any coding or any uploading of databases. So the tech is clever and it can distinguish between the name will read and I will read a book. So what you'll see here on the screen is a typical example of the tools that you have to work with. So this is a Word document. It's highlighting the different types of information that it's found. It's color coded. So some of those are names, some are job titles, some is financial information, all of which can be considered for redaction as part of that disclosure. In addition to that, you can upload your own risk indicators and regular expressions and dictionaries. So if you work in an industry that does use some quite strange terminology, then you can upload those special words into the dictionary. And if you have particular ways to identify individuals, such as a payroll configuration, could be number, dash, letter, then you can upload those into the system. We did some work with one of the police forces recently, and police officers are identified, using a string of numbers and letters. So things like that, you can program the tech to actually go off and find all that information. Once you've got that information, you can then reduce the duplicated information with a single click of a button. The tech is very clever. It finds exact copies of information. It looks for email threads as well. And if there's multiple email threads, then it automatically can eliminate all the copied information. So you're left with a data set that typically is about 60 to 70% less large than you started with, which can then clearly reduce the time it takes to review and then redact that information. So definitely rely on the AI to kind of cut that time. So my last slide is really some of the best practices that we talk to customers about. So the AI is key. So just to be clear, though, we use AI as an assist, not a replace. So AI is not a silver bullet. It will find a lot of information, but you're always going to need some eyes on before you disclose that information to the subject. Once you've got that information in the system, use the technology to take away the copied information, so the duplicated assets and the email threads. Use the in-environment collaboration tools. So rather than having to take information out of Smartbox, you can have multiple people reviewing a single case at the same time. And you can also tag different types of documents as well. So as you go through the review process, you can tag them in all sorts of different ways. So certain people get to see and review certain types of information, and other people can review others as well. The bulk redaction piece is probably one of the main reasons why people engage us. So like I said at the start, you can automatically, with a single click of a button, you can redact information that is considered not right for sharing. So that could be sensitive data, it could be third-party information that you've identified, or anything else. And you can add information into the dictionary on the fly. So as you do start to go through the documents and you start redacting, if you find that information hasn't been redacted, you can add that information automatically, and then the technology will automatically then find other references to that type of information and then prepare that for redaction as well. When it comes to sharing that document, we use multi-factor authentication, so you can send an encrypted link to the subject, who then simply just clicks the link, logs in and downloads their disclosure, or of course you can send it out to them in the post. The tracking tool that ComplyKey have will ensure that everything is processed in time, and also that particular tool can help with making sure that you are building your data set by automatically emailing the various different types of data owners as well. So the tracking and workflow tool is really critical to making sure that you meet those deadlines. And lastly, just don't panic. We know this is hard. We know the ICO are cracking down on this and sending more and more letters out, advising people that they have to send this information out. And we know the numbers of DSARs and FOIs are increasing. So it is tough. We feel your pain, but if you are struggling, then certainly pick up the phone and see how we can help.
Great. Thanks, Darren. I think a lot of people listening today can relate to the challenges that you spoke about in the first section, and hopefully by going through some of the best practices, they might feel a little bit of a relief. Just while we were talking about, I suppose, the redaction piece there, and we just have time for a few questions. And I suppose this is kind of to all the speakers here today. One question that came in earlier was, what are the potential risks associated with non-compliant redaction practices? And maybe how can organizations mitigate this risk? I know we talked about the DSAR and the FOI, and if we are not compliant there, what can happen? But in terms of, I suppose, redaction itself, what are the risks there?
So if I talk about one specific example, so I said that we do a lot of work with the trusts and medical records. So what we're seeing is that if someone requests their medical record and they have a history in that medical record of something that happened to them in an earlier part of their life that caused them some trauma, there's responsibility on the trust to make sure that information is redacted before the medical record is shared with the subject, because they can't risk triggering the subject to have another episode. So for them, they refer to these as risk indicators, and the challenge is really finding that information within that large medical record, finding the information that could cause someone harm, and then obviously redacting it. So that's one example where it's really important that information is properly redacted. From a legal perspective, I'll turn to Cristina for that.
Oh, sorry. I just realized I was muted. From a legal perspective, obviously, if the data is not redacted properly and the individuals can see information that is pertainable to other individuals or business confidential information, this can cause a data breach, and it may be reportable to the ICO. And as I mentioned, or to the regulator if you're not based in the UK. And as I mentioned, we do not want this. We do not want the reports to the regulators, even though they are very busy. They won't investigate everything, but it's obviously not something we would want to put ourselves through in a situation.
And also, we see some horror stories, right? I mean, just last year, the very well documented case of the police service in Northern Ireland. That was a freedom of information request that went into the PSNI asking for officers' details, and that information was shared and it wasn't redacted. It wasn't a data breach because nothing had been breached. It was purely an administration error, but where really highly sensitive data. I mean, you've got to remember the PSNI, not only the National Police Force of Northern Ireland, but also the Counter-Terrorism Unit as well. So the types of officers that work there are certainly the types of officers that do not want their personal data shared outside of their own environment. So, that was a very serious incident where information should have been picked up that's sensitive and it should have been redacted.
That kind of brings me on to another point as well that came in. How can redaction practices, I suppose, contribute to building and maintaining trust? Because that's kind of just on what you're talking about with the PSNI data, I suppose. Within organizations, how does it maintain trust within, I suppose, their customers and their stakeholders?
Yeah, I mean that's critical, right? I mean, if you're gonna clumsily share information outside of that organization that shouldn't be shared, then what does that say about you as a business? You know, it shows that you don't have the right governance in place, the right workflows in place, the right policies aren't being enforced, and I think there's a real genuine sort of trust issue there. You know, it's your responsibility to make sure that you are protecting the rights of the third party, that you're potentially protecting confidential information. And if you can't do the basics, then I think you are going to be put under the spotlight.
And I suppose, just to bring it back as well to, I suppose, the DSAR and the FOI piece, and have any of you guys seen any specific industries or sectors that are facing unique challenges around data subject access requests or freedom of information or redaction itself, Darren, even? I know we've a good mix of industries on our call today. You touched briefly maybe on more manual processes, actual physical documents.
Yeah, so if it's physical documents, I mean, I mentioned about the police, the prison service earlier. I mean, this is quite unique, right? So prisoners are sitting there, and every 3 months it's there, right? They're requesting the information that the prison officers are writing about them. That information at the moment is handwritten. So what's happening today is those prisoners' notes are being photocopied. They're being black penned, or the certain information is being redacted with the black pen. It's being rephotocopied and then sent out to the prisoner. You know, that is quite a unique situation in so much that, you know, that cost is a taxpayer cost. It's costing the taxpayer £5.5 million a year to provide that information, and things like that could easily be addressed with the use of technology. As far as kind of unique industries, I mean, every industry does have its own quirky challenges around that. I mentioned medical is obviously quite different. You know, we do a lot of work with central government and the Cabinet Office, and they're being asked for, you know, or they're being asked to share information all the time. And some of the information that they're having to share is clearly highly sensitive. So, you know, straight redaction is critical in that regard. But sometimes the information can be, you know, there could be an awful lot of information that needs to be redacted. You would have all seen the post office show, I'm sure, where the person where Alan Bates holds up his redacted sort of disclosure. The whole thing is redacted. So each industry and each organisation does have slightly different redaction requirements. And haven't yet seen any organisation that doesn't have any requirement for some kind of redaction, but it takes time to find information that needs to be redacted.
Great, thank you. I think we're kind of just coming close up to time, so I might just close out. I'm kind of in hindsight, I wish I'd asked a poll at the beginning to see how many people are present to use a black marker. I think that would have been a good question, so maybe for the next one. So I suppose as we wrap up the webinar today, I want to say a big thank you to our speakers, Lorcan, Darren and Cristina. I suppose your expertise has...
Well,
just when it was time for praising us, Laura.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, I know. Apologies, I'm having a few technical difficulties today. So I'll make this quick. So I suppose you've shed a good light onto the intricacies around data subjects requests, freedom of information, redaction challenges, and particularly, you know, Darren, in an AI era. So thank you very much for our engaged audience. Thank you for your participation today. I suppose if I'm to leave you with the summary is just to remember, I suppose the key to navigating data compliance lies in, number one, understanding the legislative landscape. That's it, leveraging technology, and obviously that's what here to talk about here today as well, and adopting, I suppose, the best practices like what Darren has said, shared by I suppose each of you here today. So I suppose if anybody has any further questions, feel free to reach out. I'll probably just pop up the last slide here, and we'll have all our details. We're going to be sharing the recording after as well. And look, as we say, stay compliant and stay informed, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. So thank you, everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.